Welcome back to Fast Forward, a series of interviews that invite visionaries who truly care about employee experience and well-being to delve deeper into the future of work on the front line. From manufacturing and healthcare to retail and transportation, in each episode we'll be exploring how technology, automation and other trends are shaping the way over 2.7 billion people work on the front line. My guest today is Choong, Chief People Officer for Asia Pacific at GroupM, the world's leading media investment company. Responsible for steering the group's regional HR strategy across 16 country offices and over 12,000 employees, Dylan boasts over 2 decades of HR experience. Having previously led the organisational transformation and talent management as VP of People at global brands Adidas, Sephora and Starwood Hotels, who are now part of the Marriott Group, Dylan has also been recognised as a game changer by Workforce, an award that recognises the region's best and most innovative HR practitioners. Needless to say, with such extensive experience and impressive accolades, I'm very excited to welcome him onto the series. Thanks for joining us today, Dylan, all the way from Singapore. Great to see you again.
Thank you for including me. Nice to see you again.
I'd love to learn for you to share a little bit more about your journey to where you are today at GroupM, because it's been a fascinating one to say the least.
For sure. And that was a beautiful introduction, and I think I'll use that to perhaps elaborate. Before I went into my career in HR, I was a trained architect, and somehow my journey in the HR space eventually landed me in a position today where I see myself less as an HR practitioner, but rather an architect of people and organizations. My journey started off obviously post-architecture in the hospitality sector, and rightfully, like you said, my career culminated in a leadership role heading up HR APAC for Starwood Hotels and Resorts. And that was a role that gave me an opportunity to scale. As you can tell, hospitality is a big sector and an ecosystem into itself. And I think it gave me an appreciation of both what frontline experiences are, right from working in an individual hotel to eventually leading 300 hotels across APAC of 75,000 employees. And I was fortunate enough to be part of a conversation where Starwood was acquired by Marriott. And I think this is a series of conversations where I've then focused my career on what mergers and acquisitions are, which is why then when I subsequently joined LVMH and led up Sephora for Southeast Asia, that's for 10 markets, slightly smaller remit across 10 markets and about 2,400 employees. It still kept me connected to a sector of the business which is very relevant to me because it's obviously fast-moving consumer goods with retail experiences. Sephora had acquired a digital startup, and that was then my experience in acquiring another entity and what it meant to incorporate a digital expertise from e-commerce to tech to performance marketing into what is seen as a slightly more traditional retail format that we tend to understand Sephora to be. And that was a beautiful experience, and that led to then my next journey with Adidas, which is again a transformation piece where they were redefining what Asia Pacific meant. And I zoomed in onto Southeast Asia, which is even smaller, 6 markets, but clearly into lifestyle goods, which is a different sector again. And so there's still the connection with store, retail front employees, obviously different channels. And then my journey led me to GroupM, and this is my first time stepping out of an organization that has a frontline component to it or a retail component to it. And obviously GroupM is the world's largest media investment unit, so we are dealing with knowledge or professional workers or what we would deem as white-collar workers back to an APAC scale of 16 markets. So if you see what cuts across my career journey has been shifts across sectors, from hospitality to beauty to sports to media, because I think that's where I tend to see then the differences in which organizations manage the setup of how you will architect an organization, the different customers that you field, and different customers that you have to address, and across a different remit. It's always been largely APAC. I've had global portfolios and responsibilities before, so part of my journey included me going deeper into what Southeast Asia is, and so I got closer to the customer, and I also went back and elevated myself back to where I am today, which is 12,000 employees. So I suppose a broad array of experiences across a few sectors and markets in Asia Pacific. So hopefully that sums up a little bit of some of my work experiences.
Awesome. Very varied, very extensive. I'm really interested in the differences between knowledge and frontline worker experience, and I'll touch on that later in our conversation. I think first I was keen to, clearly, given your sort of diverse experience, both geographically, but also with the roles you've been playing and the remits you've had, you're clearly very passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And working across working with teams across the APAC region. You're clearly attuned to the nuances that that influence how employees communicate and receive communication from the business. With cultural context and understanding, essentially a business critical skill set, right? For someone, for a modern people leader like yourself. I'm really interested to understand what role you believe this plays in, how an organization shapes their communication strategy, and how do you think, the role of sort of cultural context and understanding, the diversity of your workforce will play as organizations, continue to strive to become more diverse?
Really good question. And I think if we address the way in which the question was pitched, right? So obviously APAC is as diverse as we know it to be, although it is not necessarily understood as such. For many people or those who do not understand Asia Pacific, it may be seen as a monolithic block, but it's not. If you look at my current remit today, it spans on one corner of APAC, which is New Zealand, easily more than 5 hours ahead of me, all the way to India and Pakistan, which is about 3.5 hours behind. So if you just look at the richness of the 16 markets, there's no one singular language, no one culture. And I think language, culture, and locational uniqueness defines how people behave. So even as I'm running an organization that cuts across APAC, I think cultural context determines how people choose to communicate and how information is received, because I actually believe that communication is a receiver sport. So the best way to tweak a communication strategy is to understand how your receivers are going to receive a message, and it's going to be received very differently. I think that's a way to start out the conversation. Then if you add on the complexity of, if you look at, say, knowledge-based organization or knowledge workers versus retail, and this is where you add another level of complexity to it. And if you look back as to whether it truly matters, whether they're different, well, there is a difference. If you think about folks who are, say, a frontline, I think a lot of what describes frontline is you have direct access to a customer. You're perhaps potentially physically serving a customer in whatever shape and form. Your work potentially could be 24/7. If you think about hospitality, or it will cut across 7 days. And just a setup as to how your work defines your hours and how you live your life is very different from a knowledge worker, perhaps who has the privilege and luxury of, say, 5-day work weeks, 9 to 5, and you choose your hours. And so the setup is so different already, which also means that I think organizations are trying their best, genuinely, to try to communicate to employees in the best way possible. But I think what we need to understand is, if we have a starting point, if we tell ourselves, I think employees have the right to have access to information, which is about equity, and whether they receive the information that they can then best use to support themselves for whatever it's intended to, whether it is a piece of comms that needs to go out to cascade a message, or an information about the customer, or the strategies of the organization, depending on what you want to do. I think if we have a starting point that everybody should have the right to access this information, that would be great. Because I do see somehow in my experiences that we already start to see the type of information that the two types of workers should receive, because we make stuff up about whether knowledge workers know more and therefore should know more, and frontline workers should be only shared what they should know. So there's already a difference there, and I think that's always a myth that we can debunk. I agree that you can customize your message differently, but I do not want to have a starting point where I make stuff up or have a mindset as to different workers and how I perceive them to be, and the type of information that they should get. So I just want to put it out there that I think it should be a level playing field. And genuinely, I think the setup that we spoke about, which is, if you look at a frontline worker, they are defined by experiences which sometimes prevents them from receiving information that you and I as knowledge workers tend to receive. For me, I can get an email now, I can choose to respond to it, or I can pick up a phone call, or step out and do something and consume information, or in this case, even communication in my own time. I don't think our frontline workers have that privilege. Because imagine if I'm serving a customer and say if I'm in a hotel or if I'm in a retail store or if I'm in a store selling shoes, I can't because my customer's at hand. And so it's a matter of how we afford and chunk that ability for them to consume those information. And based on my experience, it could be as tactile as this is a piece of information that's printed on a piece of paper, it's on the board, and you read it on your own, all the way to daily lineups where these are the key things that you need to be aware of. Let's brief you so that you receive it. And to modern organizations that have started to equip frontline associates with technology where you don't have to access the information directly, but the information is there for you to consume when you are ready. So it cuts across traditional paper to emails to alerts to devices today. So there's a breadth of platforms that go out there. But I think what genuinely is the intention here is to make sure that the right information reaches you so that you can do your jobs better, or for you to be able to be across what the organization is doing. Or it could be about what matters to you as an employee, whether it's career paths, job opportunities, or even benefits, right? So I think when we cut a broad strip across communications, different things will require different interventions. Like I will address communication pieces around what's happening in the organization very differently from how I would speak to you as these are your rights and your benefits and your career paths, right? So it's not a single broad approach. But I think there has to be a fundamental appreciation that I think the frontline workers have it less easy than us as knowledge workers.
Mm-hmm.
So a starting point for me is that if you have a strong sense of empathy as to what it means to be serving a customer, and that's already hard, make my life easier when you communicate to me and share information to me so that it is allowing me to consume it the best way I want, as opposed to the best way in which you think an organization wants to deploy to its employee. And I've seen bad examples where, like I said, sometimes organizations just size up what an employee needs to know and we just give them what they need. I get where that's coming from. But we sometimes really underestimate today where with what's available out there, employees have access to this information anyways. Mm-hmm. And you're just coming across as insincere sometimes where they actually hear it through the grapevine as opposed to you as an organization when it truly matters.
Yeah.
So I think empathy, their setup, and essentially making sure that we tweak and deliver upon the message where employees themselves have a voice in also sharing with you as to how they like to receive information, we just make it a lot easier.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, one of the things that I feel is also super important is, obviously you're in the HR function, but the role that IT has to play in this as well. I think traditionally and historically, IT hasn't really had that strategic view on their role in cultural change, right? It's been much more sort of a practical, traditional, IT are here to make sure that you've got a laptop or you've got whatever, right? Without really caring about what that actually means in the context of what you're trying to achieve as a business. So when it comes to sort of driving transformation, which is very much ingrained in processes like process design, and obviously technology are essentially the main enabler in that to an extent as well. I think it's really important that IT and HR are equally aligned both on the challenges from a bottom up in terms of how are employees currently receiving information, or more importantly not receiving the information they need, what are the processes that we need to put in place, and the technology that's going to enable those cohorts of employees to do their job better, to be more productive, to be more engaged, to be more efficient. Increasingly seeing the relationship between IT and the HR function flourish will be key to the sort of success of driving cultural change through more effective communication.
I completely agree. And there's this strange phenomena that happens. I oftentimes wish that if we could take the same approach as to what we look at when it comes to customer experience or consumer experience or CX, and if we apply the same lens, rigor, and investment into EX or employee experience, we'll be in a far much more better place. Case in point, we do so much more for the customer. And if only we understand the relationship and the principles as to how we reach out to a customer, because we do check in to see whether customers like to receive the information the way they like to receive. We do ask them, do you want to receive it through a mailer or an email or a text message? we don't even afford such choices to our employees. We decide a singular platform and go that's the one choice in which you get. And so I don't think EX and CX are different, because if you take a consumer-centric approach to both, and then take the lessons that you glean from how you treat a paying customer to an internal customer who actually you're paying to work for you, we might just get into a better space. And so adding on to your point about IT and tech coming in, IT and tech has such a big space to influence the way in which we impact our paying customers. And so definitely a huge opportunity for them to come in and also lend the same space internally. I think there are parallels to be drawn. Just that my experiences have shown me that we just sometimes tend to do more for our customers than we tend to do for our people.
Yeah, this is definitely a topic that I'm very keen on as well, around how, HR, that people function needs to do for employee experience what marketing and customer success have obviously done for the customer experience. And, if you look at the amount of investment into technologies used to drive experience versus those, the investment into drive employee experience, the disparity is ridiculous. I think one of the reasons there is because you can attribute direct ROI, obviously, from the customer, whereas it's indirect in the sense that it's more challenging to see the impact of your efforts definitely from a technology standpoint, when you're looking at trying to measure employee engagement, trying to measure the impact of that on churn rate and attrition, and health and safety. But ultimately, we know that, the numbers around, a disengaged workforce, I think it's something like 202% less productive than an engaged workforce, right? And there's obviously a monetary value associated with that. Then there's health and safety, right? It's the second highest citation in the US for health and safety accidents is down to poor communication. So we know that, again, if you're investing in technologies that are going to engage your workforce, communicate more effectively around health and safety, communicate real-time information that allows people to make their decisions based on data rather than on gut feeling or word of mouth or disinformation that comes through those channels that are to an extent obsolete in a digital environment, then you're going to make some significant savings if we are concerned about bottom line, the same way you're going to make revenue from customers. So IT have a fundamental role in that, and they really, I think, need to understand more the human side of what they're responsible for, as much as the technical side of what they obviously need to do as well.
Yeah, I hear where you're coming from, and I think it's a matter of reframing, right? Because if you think about whether it's IT or HR, if you stop seeing things that you need to spend on as costs and start to reframe them as investments, that's already one powerful reframing that already shapes you up differently as to how you want to operate. And I get that the connection between the direct impact ROI is there, but there are organizations that establish that connection. Like, I still remember when I was in Starwood, we essentially were able to then extrapolate a leadership 360 and how it impacts culture and how culture impacts collaboration and how that impacts revenue per available room. So there is a science to it. It's just whether you want to spend time doing it. And even if organizations don't want to spend the time to really find out a correlation to it, I mean, intuitively, a disengaged workforce impacts your consumer. And so it's going to hit the paying customer in any ways that you can already imagine. So it's just, I suppose, a matter of framing how we want to see people who just are seen as cost centers and how they impact our bottom lines, and try to see them as places that we should invest in to amplify revenue. A simple reframing, but I think it just helps predicate how we see employees.
Awesome. Well, I mean, we've touched a little bit around that, the difference between an information worker experience and a frontline worker experience. And interestingly, I was reading this McKinsey report pretty recent. I think it was released last year, on bridging the advancement gap between what frontline employees want and what their employees think they want. And I was really sort of shocked to learn that I think it was 65% of frontline workers in the US are actually unaware or unsure on how to achieve career advancement in their company. And they're citing this lack of awareness and resources that are provided by the business as the main barrier to this. So, it's directly being attributed to informal communication channels. So when they do find out about it, it's word of mouth, either through a coworker or a manager, with only around, I think it was 20% of employees actually learning about career advancement opportunities through formal communication channels that are owned by the business. So, you and I as information workers, we've got access to email. So as soon as a job might go up, we're automatically, getting pinged. We're obviously on Slack. We're going on our employee experience platforms, whether it's Viva, you name it. Then there's the social media platforms as well, the internal social media. So we're at a touch. We'll know both the opportunities in real time, but also what is that learning path? What skills do I need in order to meet the job spec, the job for the role that I want to move into? And I think the same can be said for benefit programs as well, right? Organizations spend a lot of money on investing in these benefits packages, some amazing benefit packages. But again, having spoken to, in fact, one of my former guests on the series, Gethin at Benefex, global benefits platform, they put these amazing packages together, but they're not getting communicated effectively to their frontline workers. So the uptake is very low. So clearly there's an issue here, both, I guess, first and foremost around actually how this information gets to the front line, in terms of, career advancement opportunities, learning and development and benefits. But then equally, these packages are being put together without really knowing whether they're actually valuable and useful by the employees. You've obviously run a lot of programs yourself. I think it'd be really interesting to know, what advice you can give on how to design and deliver a successful program that actually does provide value to the employee and employer.
And I've said this earlier, I think the starting point would be ask them, in this case, your frontline workers, what works for them. Because if you think about the same philosophy that I have, the same principle applies to when we want to deliver on a new program for a customer or a new feature for a customer. We rope them in, we bring them into focus groups, we ask them what matters to them. If you apply the same principles to your employees, take some time to actually ask what works for you. What do you not know? What do you know? How would you like to receive your information? And I think that already cuts half the clutter out of the conversation. And then if you divide that out of your equation, what you are left with is what you're going to be sure about. I think if we devise our strategies according to what we know and how it's best going to be intended to receive and digested and consume, then we're better off than defining a strategy that will actually land. So it's strange how we spend so much money in trying to do something only to find out that their employees are not aware. They don't know how to best use them. And so the same principles echo over and over again. And so if you have a principle based on the message is as best received by the receiver and only understood by how much the receiver understands it, then it will definitely inform you as to how you can devise your strategies better. So if your employees for some strange reason are saying, I prefer this method as to how I'm going to receive this information, then design it according to how it works for them and let it be an iterative process to say, now I've tried to make that tweak. Does it really work? What are you saying about it? Because we do that for our consumers, right? And so in a lot of my experiences in trying to deliver upon, say, your frontline workers, I think what is usually helpful is in knowing how they consume this information. Now, whether it's a notice board or like an email, etc., what I tend to do a bit more of is to make sure that my principle lands on I just need to communicate a little bit more than I usually would. I think that's a very simple principle that I live by, but it always helps me understand that I will send a message out. I mean, I'm not going to hit everybody, and let's say we have a bit of a hit rate of about 75%. So I have about 25% of the population that may not know about it. If I choose to communicate a bit more, I up my uptake, because I think in such a situation, more is better than less. And I think simplify your messaging. Visuals help, call to actions help, and allowing them to know who they can reach out to helps. Because I think if you simplify the information, make it easy for people to digest, you're likely to get employees who get it, feel a level of interest, and then know what they need to do with what they need to do next. So if we're talking about career program, whether it's a poster or a blurb or a campaign, and it doesn't have to be me just sending an email out. Like I may have to do a ready campaign and go like, as you do your daily lineup today, I'm going to take 10 minutes. I'm going to talk about this, and it could be as rudimentary as me sending up and speaking to you. Or I may have a poster next to me. I may have a TV next to me or a screen next to me, and it's a visual, etc. So you could go as old school as that if you want to, all the way to having back-end TVs where you have things running in the background. I think different organizations have different investments in the kind of platforms and tools that they have. So use best what you can have, go a bit more, ask for more, and do the way in which you would do a campaign to inform a consumer and try to bring that campaign back in-house. Treat communication seriously. Put a campaign around it. Look at objectives behind it. Look at targets behind it, because we do that with our customers. You may not have to apply the same rigor, but today, if we actually do try, that's really how the battle won, like I said. And I think what generally helps is we do have touch points where we actually then understand whether our messages are received. Most organizations would have like a annual pulse or a census or quarterly ones, and they're always going to be communication of related dimensions that we ask our employees. If you are a forward organization today that has regular pulses, great. If you're not and you're still tried and tested and you have a once a year activity, great. Use what you have, because there are dimensions there where you are always asking employees, do you have the tools and resources to do your jobs well? Are you receiving communications timely? Do you understand them? Dig deep into those dimensions. That's a data-driven way to look at how you want to drive your comms and cascade strategies, and then deliver accordingly. So it's not rocket science in my opinion, but I find that a lot of times we spend so much money in doing an employee census, we don't take enough time to tear apart the data and then action upon it. Because if we do, then essentially the notion of action planning is this is what the data informs me. I'm just going to shoot an attack for how I best need to solve that problem that's emerged or that it concerns me, or an opportunity that I want to amplify further, and just go alongside. And I use it very much in, say, Sephora, because we do have regular pulses, and every single time there's an information that comes through, and it doesn't have to be a pulse, because we do have regular touch points where even if I'm sensing something from a group of people, and that's as intuitive as how communications can be, I'm like, sorry, can I just check in whether you've understood that message that's just being cascaded? What parts of it do you understand or not understand? That's almost me getting real-time information for me to tweak. And what I do as I scale programs is that I'm going to go over to the root source and say, so I have this learning here. We might have thought that this would work for the other clusters or regions or locations, but this is a newfound learning. And so I'm going to come back to the root source and say, I'm just going to let you know that this has happened, so that you're across this data point in case you need to tweak your broader comm strategies, because comm strategies may be tweaked for cultural nuances for locations, but you're also eager enough to get real-time feedback half the time to also tweak it along the way, because you will form a strategy and you come up with a campaign.
Yeah.
But I think it's about you being agile enough to get information along the way to also tweak it.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, and that's exactly what we do in marketing, right? We're not going to go and roll out a 6-month campaign, wait to the end of the campaign, and then realize, oh, actually, we had very poor engagement in this, and it hasn't delivered the results that
exactly.
we forecasted. So again, the same should be applied really in the context of what are we trying to achieve with our communication strategy, in particular with this campaign, in order to get us towards whatever that objective is. And then what are the ways we can close that feedback loop? So along the way, we can iterate and optimize the campaign to ultimately make sure that the information is getting that reach and then getting that engagement to deliver the desired effect. So totally aligned with you on that one, Dylan. We're almost out of time. I could talk to you for a lot longer. But just before sort of we wrap things up, I just asked this sort of same question to all our guests. What do you predict or hope the future of work will look like on the front line in 2040? I know that's a way off, but let's be visionary about it.
Well, I like frontline workers to eventually, or the future of work to be one where it is going to be purpose-led and purpose-driven. I think today a lot of us are working because we have to, and I know this sounds corny and perhaps a little bit of where I like to lead my life and how I wish organizations that I'm leading adopt the same. But you see, roles shifted as we went through the various evolutions, from the way the manufacturing sector or automation created chunks of jobs, and today we're all evolving to what is seen as sexy, which is knowledge workers, tech, commerce. There's a space and a heart for frontline workers too, and it is incredibly sacred, because it's the shortest distance to a consumer. And I just wish that we're not just serving a customer because they are the customer, but I'm here to make an impact on my consumer's life or my customer's life. I learned a lot about that from my humble beginnings in hospitality, in Sephora and Adidas, because they are eventually the ones and the lives that you impact. And if we are led by purpose, I think then it doesn't become a job. And then the future of work just becomes the future as opposed to the future of work.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's wonderful insight, Dylan. I totally agree. That would be a very desirable place if we could get there. Hopefully, maybe the way that technology is evolving, if it's applied in the right way, we will. Awesome. Well, thanks again, Dylan. It really has been a great conversation with you, and I hope to see you again soon.
All right. Thank you for having me.